It was late at night in a small supermarket when a 6-year-old black girl stood behind the counter, her little arms barely reaching the register. She worked there because her mother was sick at home, and every coin she earned went to buy medicine and food. That night, a woman approached her with cold eyes and a cool tone. "Do your job right, girl," she hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. The child froze, her tiny hands shaking as she tried to stay strong. Just behind her in line stood a wealthy man in an elegant suit. He had come in only to buy something quickly, but the moment he saw the scene unfold, his eyes darkened. That night, he knew he could not stay silent.
Before we dive in, hey everyone, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And watch out, if you don't hit that like, maybe this story's villain might show up in your nightmares tonight. All right, let's begin our story. The supermarket lights buzzed softly overhead, their pale glow flickering against the worn tiles on the floor. It was late, close to midnight, and most of the town of Brookhaven had already gone quiet. But inside Green Mart, a small neighborhood store, a little figure stood behind the checkout counter, her tired eyes heavy yet determined. Her name was Aaliyah, a 6-year-old girl with soft curls framing her small face and eyes that carried more weight than a child should. She was far too young to be there, ringing up groceries and bagging bread, yet necessity had pushed her into this role.
Her mother, Denise, was home in bed, coughing, her illness keeping her from working for months. There was no father in the picture. He had left when Aaliyah was still a baby. That meant everything. Rent, medicine, and food fell on this little girl's shoulders. Of course, she couldn't truly run a register on her own, but the store owner, a kind old man named Mr. Carter, allowed her to help at night. He slipped her small bills and change for her effort, pretending she was just learning. In reality, he knew she needed it. But that night, as the minutes dragged by, Aaliyah's body begged for rest. Her legs ached from standing on the little step stool behind the counter. Her fingers, small and thin, tapped nervously on the register keys. Yet her heart told her she couldn't stop. Every extra hour meant medicine, bread, or milk for her baby brother at home. She glanced down at her hands. They were tiny, but they were working hands, soapy from washing dishes at the store's back sink, dry from packing bags. She remembered the words of her mother earlier that day, whispered weakly from her bed, "We'll get through this. One day, things will change." Those words echoed in Aaliyah's chest, giving her courage. The bell above the store door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. A woman walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her blonde hair was tied up tightly, and her purse swung against her side like a weapon. She carried herself with arrogance, scanning the aisles with disdain. Aaliyah straightened nervously, standing tall on her little stool. She was always anxious with new customers. Most people looked past her, some with pity, others with annoyance. She hated the whisper she overheard. "What's a child doing here? Where's her mother?" But she endured it. The woman approached the counter with a carton of milk and some bread, slamming them down with a force that startled the little girl. "Do your job right, girl," she muttered sharply, her voice cutting through the quiet store. Aaliyah's heart skipped. She fumbled with the register keys, her tiny hands trembling. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She wanted to say, "I'm trying. Please be patient." But fear tightened her throat. The woman's eyes narrowed. "What's wrong with you? Hurry up, I don't have all night." Tears threatened at the corner of Aaliyah's eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not now. She pushed the buttons again, her voice small and shaky as she whispered, "That will be $3.25. The woman scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Figures. Can't even speak properly. What kind of place lets a little girl like you work here?" Her words dripped with contempt, each one heavier than the last. Behind her, the bell above the store door jingled again. This time, the figure that entered carried a completely different aura. A tall man in his mid-30s stepped inside, brushing raindrops from his tailored navy blue suit. His polished shoes clicked softly against the floor, and in his hand he held a sleek black briefcase. His name was Marcus Reed, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the state. He was passing through Brookhaven after a long meeting, stopping only because he craved a strong cup of coffee to push him through the drive home. But as soon as he stepped through the door, his sharp eyes caught the scene at the register: a small child, far too young to be working, struggling under the weight of a cruel customer's words. He froze for a moment, his chest tightening. He had seen hardship in boardrooms, betrayal among partners, but nothing struck him deeper than seeing innocence under attack. The woman continued her barrage, tapping her nails impatiently on the counter. "Well, are you going to bag my groceries, or are you too slow for that, too?" Aaliyah's hands shook as she reached for the bread, her fingers brushing against the paper bag. She whispered, almost to herself, "I'm sorry." Marcus's jaw tightened. He felt his blood boil. His instinct screamed at him to step forward, to end the cruelty unfolding before his eyes. But he waited, observing, measuring the situation. He wanted to see how far the woman would go. The little girl placed the items in the bag carefully, her small frame trembling. She handed them back to her, her voice barely above a whisper. "Here you go, ma'am." The woman snatched the bag from her hands, glaring down at her. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. Marcus had seen enough. His voice cut through the air, deep and commanding. "Excuse me." The woman spun around, startled. Her arrogance faltered as her eyes met his. She recognized the expensive suit, the aura of authority, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "What? This is none of your business." Marcus's gaze hardened. He looked at Aaliyah, then back at the woman. "When you humiliate a child, you make it everyone's business." The room went silent. Even the buzz of the lights seemed to fade. Aaliyah looked up at him, her eyes wide, hope flickering where fear had been. The woman continued her barrage, but something in Marcus's steady gaze stopped her. She huffed, clutching her purse tighter. "Whatever, I don't have time for this." With that, she stormed out, the bell above the door jingling violently as it slammed shut behind her. Aaliyah stood frozen, her small hands still trembling. Her lips quivered when she whispered, "Thank you." Marcus stepped closer, his voice softening. "Are you all right?" She nodded faintly, though her eyes still glistened. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt something stir inside him, a protective instinct, stronger than any business deal, stronger than ambition. He looked down at the little girl and realized that this night, meant to be ordinary, was about to change both of their lives forever.
The store felt quiet again after the woman left, her sharp words lingering in the air like smoke. Aaliyah stood motionless behind the counter, her small hands still trembling, her dark curls sticking slightly to her damp cheeks. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until Marcus leaned forward and spoke again. "You don't belong here this late," he said gently, his deep voice softer now. "Where's the owner?" From the back of the store, an older man shuffled in, Mr. Carter, his white hair sticking out in tufts beneath his worn cap. His face was weary, but his eyes carried a kindness that immediately explained why Aaliyah was here at all. He gave Marcus a polite nod. "Evening, sir. Can I help you?" Marcus turned to him, his brows knitting together. "This child shouldn't be behind a counter dealing with customers like that." Mr. Carter sighed, his shoulders sagging. I know. But you see, her family's been struggling. Her mama's real sick, and they don't have much. I just let her stay here, give her a little something for her time. It's not official work, but it helps." Marcus looked down at Aaliyah again. She stood small and fragile, but her chin lifted slightly, as if trying to defend herself. "I'm fine," she whispered. "I can do it." Her words pierced him. No 6-year-old should have to convince a grown man she was strong enough to work. He felt the weight of it, heavy and unfair. "Do you have school tomorrow?" Marcus asked. She nodded timidly. "I go in the morning, but I come here after." The thought of her dragging herself through school, exhausted from nights like this, made his chest tighten. He glanced at Mr. Carter again. "And no one has stepped in? No social services? No one?" Mr. Carter shook his head slowly. "Her mama doesn't want to lose her. She's afraid if anyone finds out, they'll take Aaliyah away. So she keeps quiet, does her best,
best, and this little one does hers." Aaliyah lowered her gaze, hugging her arms around herself. The mention of being taken away struck a chord of fear inside her. The only thing worse than working late nights was being separated from her mother and baby brother. Marcus exhaled, his mind racing. He had spent his life solving problems in business, finding opportunities where others saw failure, investing where no one else dared. Yet here was a situation that felt bigger than anything he had faced, because it wasn't about profits or risks. It was about a child carrying burdens that would break most adults.
He set his briefcase on the counter and crouched slightly so he was at her level. His tailored suit contrasted sharply with the worn step stool she stood on, but his expression was warm, steady. "What's your name?" "Aaliyah," she said softly. "Well, Aaliyah," Marcus replied, "you were very brave just now. Not everyone could handle words like that and still stand tall." Her lips pressed together, uncertain. Brave? She didn't feel brave. She felt small. But hearing it made something flicker inside her chest, something that almost felt like hope. "Do you like working here?" he asked. She hesitated, glancing at Mr. Carter, then at the counter. "I like helping Mama," she admitted. "If I don't help, we won't have enough for food or medicine, so I have to." Marcus's throat tightened. She said it not with bitterness, but with quiet acceptance, as if it were simply her role in life. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stood tall again, his decision forming like steel in his mind. "Mr. Carter, make sure she goes home early tonight. No more customers treating her like that." The old man nodded quickly. "Of course, I'll close up after she leaves." Marcus turned back to Aaliyah. "Do you live far?" She shook her head. "Not far, just a few blocks." "Then I'll walk you home," he said without hesitation. Her eyes widened. "You don't have to." "I insist," Marcus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. She looked at Mr. Carter, unsure. The old man gave her a gentle smile. "Go on, sweetheart. He's right. It's late." Reluctantly, Aaliyah stepped down from the stool. She smoothed her faded dress with her small hands, as if trying to make it look less worn. Marcus noticed every detail. The fraying edges, the thin fabric too light for the cold night air. He wanted to take off his jacket and wrap it around her immediately, but he held back, not wanting to scare her. Together, they stepped out into the street. The air was sharp and cool, the town mostly asleep. The neon sign above the store flickered faintly, casting pale light over the sidewalk. Aaliyah walked slowly, her little shoes tapping against the cracked pavement. Marcus adjusted his pace to match hers, his briefcase swinging at his side. He had walked countless city streets, entered hundreds of boardrooms, but this short walk felt more important than any deal he had ever signed. After a few quiet moments, he asked softly, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" The question caught her off guard. She looked up at him with wide eyes, as if no one had ever asked her that before. I don't know," she admitted. "I just want Mama to get better, and I want my brother to have toys. He never had toys." Marcus's throat tightened again. Such simple wishes, wishes that should have been basic rights, were to her dreams. "You'll have more than that one day," he promised, his voice low but steady. She blinked at him, unsure what he meant, but the kindness in his tone made her believe it might be true. They reached the corner of a narrow street where dim lights glowed in a run-down apartment building. Aaliyah pointed up toward a window where a faint light flickered. "That's home." Marcus studied the building. The bricks were chipped, the railings rusted, and the paint peeled away in long streaks. It was no place for a sick mother, a baby, and a little girl carrying the world on her shoulders. At the entrance, Aaliyah paused. She turned to him, hugging her small arms around herself. Thank you for stopping that lady, and for walking with me." Marcus looked down at her, his eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me, Aaliyah. What she did was wrong. You deserve respect, and you deserve more than this." Her lips trembled into the smallest smile, one that seemed to carry both gratitude and disbelief. Then she hurried up the steps, glancing back once before disappearing inside. Marcus stood there for a long moment, staring at the cracked doorway. Inside that small apartment was a family on the edge of collapse, and standing on that step tonight had been a little girl who had reminded him of something he had long forgotten, what it meant to fight for more than just yourself. As he walked back toward his car, the decision solidified in his mind.
This would not be the last time he saw Aaliyah. He couldn't walk away, not when he knew her life could be changed, not when he realized that maybe, just maybe, she had changed his too.
Morning traffic hummed like a low river outside Marcus's penthouse windows, but he barely heard it. The city calendar on his tablet blinked with meetings, calls, and a lunch he'd scheduled weeks ago with a venture partner. He slid it aside. The only appointment that mattered today wasn't on his calendar. A paper bag sat on the counter, already half filled. Fresh fruit, a loaf of warm bread, still breathing steam through its paper sleeve, cartons of soup, a small bundle of chamomile and peppermint tea. Next to it, he'd placed a children's toothbrush, a mint green comb, and a soft yellow blanket that made him think of sunlight. He hesitated at a pink box on the island, crayons, and a drawing pad. Was that too much? Too personal? He added it anyway. Aaliyah's face from last night hovered in his mind. Wide eyes, small shoulders, a bravery that looked too heavy for someone so young. He left the penthouse early. The morning was cool and pale. A bright sheet of sky stretched over the city. On the way, he stopped by a pharmacy and asked for the basics: a digital thermometer, children's cold medicine, and a small humidifier. The clerk looked surprised when Marcus asked which one was quiet enough for a tiny apartment. Marcus thanked her, carried everything to the car, and drove toward the block Aaliyah had pointed out. The building looked different in daylight, but not kinder. Flakes of paint clung to the brick like last winter's frost. The entry buzzer was a metal grid of worn numbers. Taped over several buttons were scrawled names. He found the apartment number Aaliyah had indicated and pressed. A crackling voice answered, weary but cautious. "Yes? Good morning," he said softly. "My name is Marcus. I met your daughter last night at Carter's Corner Market. She told me you live here. I brought a few things." Silence, then a cough, tired, shallow. The speaker buzzed, and the door clicked. "Second floor," the voice said. "Follow the hallway, last door on the left." He climbed the narrow stairs, careful with the bags. The scent of fried onions and detergent hung in the hallway. When he reached the final door, it opened before he could knock. A woman in her early 30s stood there, shoulder-length coils pulled into a loose scarf, a gray cardigan wrapped tight around her. She wore fatigue like an undershirt, but her eyes, soft brown, watchful, held a steadiness that reminded him of Aaliyah's. "I'm Nina," she said. Her voice was kind but guarded. "You helped my girl?" "She helped me," Marcus answered, and meant it. "May I come in?" Nina glanced at the grocery bags, then stepped aside. The apartment was clean, small, and tenderly arranged to be more than it could afford to be. A fold-out couch made the living room feel like a bedroom that had borrowed a TV. On the coffee table sat a vase with 2 white daisies, faux but bright. On the wall, a paper calendar dotted with pencil notes: payday, clinic, school play, canceled, circled twice. A toddler sat on the floor beside a pile of plastic cups, stacking them with a concentration so deep that he didn't notice the stranger. He had big wondering eyes and a curl that refused to obey gravity. Nina followed Marcus's gaze. "That's Jeremiah," she said, a small smile easing the line of her mouth. 2 years old. He woke up early asking for cereal he's already eaten. Marcus knelt down, set the bags on the couch, then crouched to Jeremiah's level. "Hey, champion, that's a serious tower you've got there." Jeremiah glanced up, studied Marcus with solemn curiosity, then returned to his cups and added another to the stack. "Is Aaliyah home?" Marcus asked, standing again. Nina nodded toward the bedroom, getting ready for school. She didn't want to be late. A quiet sadness laced the words, pride and apology woven together. "She told me what happened at the store, and that a man stepped in, walked her home. Thank you. You don't owe me thanks. I brought a few things: food, some medicine in case anyone's fighting a cold, a humidifier for the nights." He lifted the yellow blanket with a sheepish smile. "And this, if it's useful." Nina's hand rose to her chest as if to catch something falling inside her. For a moment she said nothing. Then she blinked back a shine in her eyes and cleared her throat. "This is more than kind." From the bedroom doorway appeared Aaliyah, backpack slung over both shoulders, dress neatly smoothed, curls combed, small rituals that tried to turn courage into clothing. When she saw Marcus, she startled, then smiled, quick, unsure, but real. "You came," she said. "I said I would." He held up the drawing pad. "I brought a few supplies for a future artist." Aaliyah's smile grew, then she glanced at her mother, waiting. Nina nodded. "You can say thank you." "Thank you," Aaliyah said, hugging the paper to her backpack like a shield she'd wanted her whole life. Marcus cleared his throat. He wasn't sure how to balance generosity
generosity with respect, how to help without turning help into a spotlight. I was thinking, if it's all right, I could take Aaliyah to school today. I'm heading that direction anyway, and maybe after I could talk with the principal. Not to cause trouble, just to make sure she's supported. Maybe there are programs, tutoring, meals. Nina's guard returned for a fraction. People sometimes mean well, and then they make decisions without us. You're right, he said, plain and earnest. Nothing happens unless you want it to. I'll follow your lead. The words untied something in the room. Nina breathed out, a soft laugh threading through. Well, I could use an extra pair of hands this morning, if you don't mind Jeremiah trying to sell you his cup tower. I'll make an offer he can't resist. They moved through small tasks that felt like promises disguised as ordinary minutes. Marcus brewed tea while Nina got her medicine, and he assembled 2 simple lunches, peanut butter sandwiches cut into hearts because the knife wanted to try, and slipped an apple in each bag. Aaliyah hovered at the counter, eyes darting between her mother and Marcus, as if the sight might vanish.
Do you like science? He asked her, noticing a folded worksheet on the table. I like space, she said. The moon looks different every night. Some nights, he said, it looks like it's missing a piece, but it always comes back. He handed her the lunch bag. She held it as if it were delicate. Nina reappeared with a scarf, wrapped it around Aaliyah's neck, and smoothed a stray curl behind her ear. You listen to your teacher, she said, and if you feel tired, tell somebody. Aaliyah nodded solemnly. I will. At the door, Marcus turned to Nina. I'll bring her straight back after school. Unless you prefer to meet us, I can text you when we're on the way. Nina hesitated, then scribbled her number on a notepad by the phone. Text me. And, Marcus? She lifted her gaze, steady now. Thank you for seeing her. He nodded, throat tight. I wish I'd seen her sooner. The morning outside had warmed by a few degrees, enough to let the air smell like bread and bus exhaust, and laundry soap drifting from somewhere upstairs. Marcus carried his briefcase in one hand and Aaliyah's backpack in the other, until she insisted she could manage both. They walked together, Jeremiah's wave trapped in the window behind them, Nina's silhouette a soft shape at the curtain. On the sidewalk, a woman sold coffee from a cart and winked at Aaliyah, who looked surprised to be noticed kindly in daylight. A bus roared past, pigeons lifted like gray confetti. What's your favorite planet? Marcus asked. Saturn, she said instantly. It has rings. It looks like it's fancy, but it's just ice. He laughed. Sometimes the fancy things are the coldest. They reached the school gate just as the bell rang. Children poured in, laughter bouncing off the brick. Aaliyah hesitated, as if doorways had become dangerous places where decisions were made without her. Marcus crouched slightly, lowering his voice. I'll be here at dismissal, if you want me to be. She studied his face, measuring, testing. Then she nodded. Okay. He watched until she disappeared into the stream of backpacks and sneakers, then straightened, exhaled, and turned toward the front office. A secretary looked up from a stack of attendance sheets. The walls behind her were papered with construction paper rockets and stars. Good morning, Marcus said. I'm here on behalf of a student, Aaliyah Johnson. I'm a family friend. I'd like to talk about support services available to her. The secretary's expression softened at the quiet urgency in his tone. Of course, she said, gesturing to a chair. Let me get the counselor. As he waited, Marcus texted Nina. Aaliyah is in. I'll meet her after school. I'm asking about tutoring and meal programs, only with your okay. A bubble of dots appeared. Then Nina's reply. Thank you. Yes, please ask. We'll decide together. The counselor arrived. A woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that knew when to be kind and when to be steel. She listened, asked careful questions, and took notes. She spoke of a breakfast program, an after-school reading group, a community clinic that held evening hours for families who worked late. She didn't once speak down to him or over him. She spoke to Aaliyah, even in her absence. By the time Marcus stepped back into the hallway, the day had truly begun. Children's voices rising up the stairwell like something hopeful, being built one story at a time. He stood there, absorbing the sound. He had told investors for years that you don't fix everything at once. You build one beam, then another. It felt profoundly different to believe that same thing about a life. On his way out, his phone buzzed again. A new message from Nina. Jeremiah says thank you for the quiet cloud. A photo followed, the little humidifier puffing a ghost of mist into the sunlit window. Then another line.
"We don't have much, but you're welcome to dinner if you're free tonight." It would mean a lot to her. Marcus paused on the sidewalk, warmth spreading through him in a way coffee never managed. He typed back, "I'd be honored. I'll bring dessert." He added a smile, then deleted it, then added it again. Across the street, a construction crew hammered rhythm into beams. Somewhere, a siren wailed and faded. A flock of starlings arrowed across the sky like handwriting. Marcus lifted his face to the light. For the first time in a long time, he felt precisely where he needed to be. Not at the top of a tower, not in the middle of a deal, but at the edge of an ordinary school day, waiting for a little girl who had taught him the shape of a promise. He checked the time, breathed in, and started planning the rest of the day around 3 p.m., a meeting he would not miss.
The evening light slanted across the city, soft gold sliding between the buildings as Marcus parked his car near Nina's apartment. The grocery bags on the seat beside him felt heavier than they were. Pasta, fresh vegetables, chicken, a small chocolate cake boxed neatly in white paper. He wasn't sure what Nina had in mind for dinner, but he'd promised dessert, and promises mattered. The stairwell smelled faintly of bleach and onions again. He climbed 2 steps at a time, careful not to spill the cake. At the door, Aaliyah opened before he knocked, her curls bouncing as she peeked out. She wore the same pink sweater from the morning, but her eyes looked brighter, as if the weight she carried had lifted a little. "You came," she said, repeating the words from earlier, but with more certainty. "I said I would," Marcus answered, smiling. He held up the cake box like a magician about to reveal a trick. Her eyes widened, and she stepped aside quickly to let him in. Inside, Jeremiah sat cross-legged on the floor again, this time with crayons spread out like confetti across the table. He lifted one, proudly showing Marcus a scribble that looked halfway between a sun and a wheel. "That's brilliant," Marcus said, crouching down to admire it. "Do you have a name for it?" "Round," Jeremiah announced, then returned to coloring. Nina emerged from the kitchen, tying the sash of her cardigan tighter. She looked tired still, but softer now, a line of trust forming where caution had been. "Dinner's almost ready. I hope you're hungry. It's just pasta and some vegetables I had left, but—" "Perfect," Marcus interrupted gently. He placed the bags on the counter. "And I brought a little extra. Maybe you can use it tomorrow." She eyed the bag. Too much food for a single meal, and her lips parted as if to protest, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded, her shoulders loosening slightly. The 4 of them sat around the small table that barely had space for the dishes. Nina served carefully measured portions, but Marcus added more to Aaliyah's plate when she hesitated. She glanced at her mother, who gave a small nod, then began to eat. It was quiet at first, forks tapping plates, Jeremiah humming softly as he ate, but then Marcus leaned toward Aaliyah. "So, you like space, right? Saturn?" Her face lit up immediately. "Yes, with the rings. And Jupiter has a storm bigger than the whole Earth." "Exactly," Marcus said, delighted. "The Great Red Spot. It's been raging for hundreds of years. Can you imagine a storm lasting that long?" Jeremiah giggled, repeating storm, storm, as though it were a funny word. Nina smiled faintly, watching the exchange. After dinner, Aaliyah helped clear the plates, balancing them carefully as if afraid to spill. Marcus joined her at the sink, rolling up his sleeves. "I'm good with dishes." "You don't have to," Nina began, but he had already turned on the faucet. Aaliyah stood beside him, rinsing forks and passing them to her mother. It felt strangely like a family routine, ordinary, steady, and warm. When everything was put away, Marcus set the cake box in the center of the table. He opened it with a flourish, revealing the chocolate icing swirled into soft peaks. Aaliyah gasped, then clapped her hands once. "Cake?" she whispered, as if the word itself were too rare. "Cake," Marcus confirmed. He cut a slice and placed it in front of her, then one for Jeremiah, who immediately smeared frosting across his cheek. Nina laughed, really laughed, for the first time that evening. As they ate, Aaliyah leaned closer to Marcus. Do you think you could show me more about space sometime? Like real books?" "Of course," he said, without hesitation. "I'll bring you a book tomorrow, and maybe a telescope if we're lucky." Her eyes shone in the dim light, brighter than the candles flickering in the corner. Later, when it was time to leave, Marcus stood by the door, his briefcase back in his hand. "Thank you for dinner. It was wonderful." "You brought half of it," she replied, shaking her head. But there was a softness in her tone. He looked at Aaliyah, who hugged the drawing pad he had given her that morning. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said. She nodded, smiling shyly. "Good night, Marcus." As he stepped back into the hallway, the weight of his business meetings and schedules felt distant. He realized something unexpected had happened. In one quiet evening,
over pasta and crayons and cake. He had stepped into a life that felt more real than any deal he had ever closed. And as he walked to his car, the thought settled deep inside him. This wasn't charity, wasn't a one-time kindness. It was the beginning of something larger, something that could not be measured in dollars. It was a promise forming, one meal, one smile, one shared moment at a time.
The next morning dawned gray, the city wrapped in a thin veil of mist. Marcus sat in his office on the 20th floor. A view of skyscrapers spread before him like steel giants. His assistant spoke about contracts and meetings, but his mind wasn't there. It was still in that tiny kitchen, where laughter over chocolate cake had been louder than any applause he had ever received in boardrooms. He leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie. On the desk lay his phone with a new drawing Aaliyah had texted through Nina, a clumsy sketch of Saturn's rings colored in with crayons. The caption read, "For Marcus, thank you for dinner." He smiled, but the smile faded quickly. A knock sounded at his door, and Harold, a longtime business associate, stepped in. Harold was older, grayer, with a sharp suit and sharper eyes. "You've been distracted," Harold said, lowering himself into the chair opposite. "Some of the board members are whispering. They think you're preoccupied." Marcus straightened. "I've been managing everything just fine." "Managing, yes, but distracted. That's new. They're asking where you've been spending your evenings." Harold leaned forward. "You're a millionaire businessman, Marcus. The image matters. Be careful where you invest your time." Marcus clenched his jaw. He knew Harold meant well in his blunt way, but the implications stung. Why should it matter if he spent time with a girl and her struggling family? Meanwhile, in the modest apartment across town, Nina folded laundry at the kitchen table. Aaliyah sat nearby, drawing more planets, while Jeremiah napped in the corner. But the laughter from last night had cooled. The landlady had visited that morning, her voice curt. "Rent is due by Friday. No excuses." Nina pressed her hands against the pile of shirts, fighting tears. She had been grateful for Marcus's kindness, but she hated depending on it. She wanted to stand tall for her children, not appear like a charity case. Aaliyah, oblivious, hummed softly. "Mommy, Marcus said he might bring a telescope. Can he really do that?" Nina looked at her daughter, bright-eyed, hopeful, and felt the weight of responsibility crush harder. Marcus was kind, but how long could kindness last before it turned into pity? That evening, Marcus returned, carrying a thin box under his arm. When Aaliyah saw it, she squealed, "The telescope!" She hugged him so tightly he nearly dropped it. They set it up on the balcony, the mist clearing enough to reveal a silver sliver of the moon. Aaliyah pressed her eye to the lens, gasping as if she had discovered treasure. "Mommy, look! I can see craters!" Nina approached, hesitant, then leaned down to peer through. For the first time in weeks, her tired face softened. Marcus watched her, realizing she hadn't had a moment to simply see wonder in a very long time. But just as warmth filled the small space, a neighbor walked by below, muttering loud enough to be heard, "Rich men buying poor families. Seen it before."
The words hung in the air like smoke. Nina stiffened, pulling away from the telescope. Aaliyah looked between them, confused. Marcus's chest tightened. He wanted to shout back, to defend himself, but instead, he swallowed the anger. He looked at Nina, whose eyes carried doubt. "I'm not here out of pity," he said quietly, but firmly. "I'm here because I want to be." Nina studied him, silent, torn between gratitude and fear. The telescope stood ready, pointing at the stars, but the ground beneath them felt unsteady. That night, as Marcus drove home, he replayed Harold's warning and the neighbor's sneer. For the first time, doubt gnawed at him. Was he really helping, or was he building a fragile world that could collapse at any careless word? Yet one memory steadied him. Aaliyah's face lit by moonlight, her gasp of wonder as she saw the craters. That moment alone told him this was worth every whisper.
Marcus had always believed numbers were easier than people. Numbers didn't judge, didn't whisper, didn't carry hidden meanings behind their silence. But ever since stepping into that modest apartment and watching a little girl's world light up over a telescope, the clarity he once carried in boardrooms had begun to blur. The next morning, He poured himself a coffee in the sleek, chrome kitchen of his penthouse. The walls of glass looked out over the bustling city below, sunlight catching on the mirrored skyscrapers. He should have felt on top of the world, but the taste of bitterness clung to his tongue. Harold's words from the day before echoed like a warning siren. Careful where you invest your time. He pushed the mug aside, grabbed his keys, and drove. Not to the office. He needed answers, not contracts. His car carried him back through the narrow streets that had started to feel familiar, toward the building where Nina and her children lived. Inside, the morning carried a different rhythm. Nina swept the kitchen floor while humming softly, trying to disguise the knot in her chest. Rent was looming like a storm cloud, and she still didn't know where the money would come from. Jeremiah toddled around with his stuffed bear, and Aaliyah sat at the small table, coloring planets again. "Mommy," Aaliyah chirped, holding up her drawing. "I made Saturn with more rings this time. Do you think Marcus will like it?" Nina's broom paused mid-sweep. She forced a smile, though her heart ached. "I'm sure he will, sweetheart." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Last night's words from the neighbor hadn't left her mind. Rich men buying poor families. What if people thought she was using Marcus? What if Marcus thought the same? The sound of a knock interrupted her spiral. Aaliyah jumped up, rushing to the door, and flung it open before Nina could stop her. There stood Marcus, in a crisp navy blazer, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of pastries and fresh coffee. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but cautious. Aaliyah ran to hug him. "Marcus, did you come to see my drawing?" He chuckled, crouching down to meet her eyes. "I wouldn't miss it." Behind her, Nina wiped her hands on a towel. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said, her tone polite but guarded. "I wanted to," Marcus replied simply, stepping inside. They sat at the table, the three of them, while Jeremiah climbed onto Marcus's lap with the ease of a child who already trusted him. He didn't mind. He adjusted the boy comfortably and broke open the bag. "I brought croissants. Figured it was time for something better than plain toast." Aaliyah grinned, taking one eagerly, but Nina only sipped her coffee, her gaze heavy. Marcus noticed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said, quickly, but then her voice cracked. "It's just that people talk, Marcus. They see you coming here, helping us. They don't understand." Marcus set his cup down slowly. "Do you understand?" Her eyes met his, full of conflict. "I'm grateful, truly, but I don't want Aaliyah or Jeremiah to think the only way someone will care for them is if they give something in return. And I don't want people thinking—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "That you're using me," he finished gently. She winced at the bluntness, but nodded. Marcus leaned forward, his tone steady. "Nina, I don't care what your neighbors say. I don't care what men like Harold think. When I saw Aaliyah in that store, I saw a child carrying burdens no child should carry. And when I came here, I didn't see charity. I saw family."
The word hung in the air like a fragile truth. Nina blinked rapidly, fighting tears. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let go of the doubt, but fear had lived with her longer than hope. The conversation was cut short by a sudden pounding on the door. Nina startled. Jeremiah whimpered, and Marcus instinctively stood, his protective instincts rising. From the other side came the voice of the landlady, sharp and uncompromising. "Rent, Nina. I want it tomorrow. No more excuses." Nina rushed to the door, opening it just a crack. "Please, I told you I just need—" "No more," the landlady interrupted coldly. "Tomorrow or you're out." She turned on her heel, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nina closed the door slowly, leaning against it as if it held the weight of the world. Marcus, watching her tremble, felt something harden inside him. He had spent years building empires, but this, watching a mother break under pressure, felt like the true test of his power. He took a step closer. "How much is it?" "Marcus," her voice was a plea, "I can't take your money like that. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering peace of mind." He reached for his wallet, then paused, forcing himself to stop. Throwing money at the problem wasn't the answer. Not yet. He needed Nina to see him as more than a wallet. He needed her to trust his intentions. "Then let me help another way. Let me talk to the landlady. Or better yet, let me find you something better than this place." Nina shook her head fiercely. "You don't understand. I've been surviving on my own for years. Accepting help, it feels like losing control." Marcus exhaled, frustrated but careful. "Then let me prove this isn't about control. It's about making sure Aaliyah and Jeremiah never have to wonder if they'll have a roof tomorrow." The children, oblivious to the storm of adult emotions, giggled as Buddy, the puppy Marcus had secretly arranged to be checked at a vet earlier that week, padded into the room, tail wagging. Aaliyah's joy was simple, pure. Marcus looked at her, then at Nina, and knew he couldn't step back now. That evening, after Marcus left, Nina sat by the window long after the children had gone to bed. She stared out at the flickering street lamp, her heart torn between fear and hope. She remembered Marcus's words, "I saw family." Was it possible that someone like him could truly see them that way? Or was she just waiting for the moment when generosity turned into distance like it always had before? Across the city, Marcus poured himself another coffee he didn't drink. His mind was with them, not with the papers on his desk. He remembered Harold's warning again, but this time it didn't sting. Instead, it fueled his resolve. Let them whisper. Let them doubt. He had seen something worth more than reputation, worth more than money. He had seen the stars reflected in the eyes of a child who deserved the world, and he intended to give it to her.
Morning thinned the night into a pale ribbon of light when Marcus parked at the curb outside Nina's building. He had not slept much. Numbers and strategies had kept looping in his head, but the plan that finally formed felt simple enough to hold. Show up, stand steady, and turn promises into things you can see. On the second-floor landing, he heard soft voices and the cheerful skitter of tiny paws. Aaliyah opened the door before he could knock twice. She wore a t-shirt spattered with paint and the kind of smile that made the hallway feel brighter. "Marcus, I made you something," she announced, tugging him inside. The kitchen smelled like toast and instant coffee. Jeremiah sat in his high chair, smearing jelly on crackers, while Buddy's tail thumped like a metronome beneath him. Nina, hair tied back and eyes tired but clearer than yesterday, nodded a guarded hello. Aaliyah thrust a folded paper into Marcus's hands. Inside, a drawing of 3 stick figures and a lopsided dog standing under a sky of thick blue crayon lines. The smallest figure, labeled Me, held the hand of a tall one with dark scribbled hair, labeled Marcus. Between them, a telescope. He felt something loosen in his chest. "This is going on my refrigerator," he said, meaning it. Nina's mouth tipped into a reluctant grin. "He doesn't even have magnets," she teased softly. "I'll buy magnets," he returned, and Aaliyah giggled like that was the cleverest solution in the world. They ate toast together, a quiet that wasn't strained but careful, like everyone was learning a new choreography. When the dishes were rinsed, Marcus set his cup down. Time to move the plan from thought to action. "May I speak to your landlady?" he asked, eyes on Nina. Color drained from her face. "Marcus, I'm not here to steamroll anything," he said, lifting his palms. "Let me talk, just talk. If she budges, great. If not, we try another door." Nina hesitated, measuring the offer against the hard geography of experience. But Aaliyah looked up, hope bright as a flare. "Mom, maybe he can help." The silence stretched. At last, Nina nodded. "All right, I'll come with you." Mrs. Klein lived on the ground floor behind a door with peeling numbers and a brass peephole that blinked like a tired eye. She opened it a crack at first, then wider when she recognized Nina, and widened again when she clocked the tailored blazer and calm spine of the man beside her. "Rent's due today," she said by way of greeting, voice brisk as a stapler. Nina inhaled. Marcus stepped forward a fraction, not eclipsing her, just present. "Good morning, Mrs. Klein. I'm Marcus Reed. I'd like a brief conversation about Nina's lease." Her mouth set. "I don't renegotiate. Too many tried. I'm not here to haggle," he said evenly. "I'm here to relieve pressure. If you grant a 30-day extension with no late penalties, I will personally guarantee the month and pay today. In addition, I'll cover hallway bulb replacements and plumbing maintenance this quarter if invoices are provided, in writing." The landlady's brows tilted. She had the look of someone who'd been trained by years to expect the bad ending first. "Why?"
"Because continuity is good business," Marcus said, and he meant it. Stable, quiet tenants are an asset. Nina keeps a clean unit, her kids are respectful, and this building doesn't need turnover costs. Mrs. Klein studied him like a puzzle with too many pieces. Then she turned to Nina. "You vouch for him?" Nina's throat moved. "I do." The words surprised even her, but they landed true. Minutes later, a simple addendum was scrawled and signed on the laminate counter. 30 days.
days, no fees. Payment receipt printed from an aging machine that chirped triumphantly. On the way upstairs, Nina stayed quiet until the second step from her door, where she stopped, back against the rail, as if her knees had turned to water. "You didn't have to pay at all." "I did," he said, "and let the rest hang open. No strings, no speeches." She looked at him then with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not suspicion, not relief, but a dawning steadiness. "Thank you." Aaliyah was waiting, bouncing on her heels. "Did we win?" Nina laughed, the sound light, surprised. "For today, we did." By noon, the apartment had reorganized itself into a Saturday rhythm. Cartoons murmuring from an old TV, a laundry basket half emptied, Buddy curled in a patch of sun like a charged battery slowly cooling. Marcus helped reattach a cabinet hinge with a screwdriver that had seen too many jobs. He did it quietly, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. At the table, Aaliyah and Jeremiah built a city from cereal boxes and tape, skyscrapers with wobbly spines, a cardboard park for Buddy, and a star observatory made from a paper towel roll. Aaliyah named it Sky City. "Every city needs a library," Marcus said, laying down a rectangle of folded carton. "And a bakery," Aaliyah insisted, drawing a window full of croissants. "And a clinic," Nina added, almost shyly, sketching a red cross with a half-dried marker. "For checkups, preventative stuff." Marcus glanced at her. It was the first time she had spoken a want that looked past tomorrow. He felt the moment land like a stake in firm ground. The knock when it came was a different kind. Light, tentative. Marcus rose, expecting a neighbor. Instead, Harold stood there, tie loosened, raincoat slung over his forearm despite the clear day, curiosity and misgiving wrestling behind his glasses. "Mind if I, come in?" Harold asked, peering around Marcus's shoulder. "Come in," Marcus said, surprised but calm. The room shifted. Harold took in the scene, the taped skyline, the kids, Nina's wary poise, Marcus in shirt sleeves with a screwdriver still in his back pocket. He cleared his throat. "Brought by some, forms," he began, holding up an envelope he clearly didn't need to deliver in person, "but also to see that you're really doing this." "Doing what?" Marcus asked mildly. "Being involved, beyond writing checks." Nina's chin lifted a fraction. Harold noticed. His tone softened. "Look, Reed, I said some cynical things yesterday. I've watched a lot of men talk big and vanish. But my wife volunteers at the legal aid clinic on 3rd. They help with child care vouchers, school transfers, medical referrals. If you want infrastructure instead of Band-Aids, these contacts are a decent start." Nina studied Harold anew, as if the rough shape of him had smoothed slightly. "Thank you," she said. Harold nodded, awkward in the presence of gratitude. "And, kid," he told Aaliyah, pointing at Sky City, "your skyline needs a bridge. Nothing stands alone." Aaliyah grinned, already rifling for tape. When the door shut behind Harold, Marcus leaned against it and exhaled. That felt unexpected. People surprise you, sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better. Late afternoon drew the light longer. Marcus took the kids to the corner lot where a community group ran a pop-up fair. Card tables with second-hand books, a face-painting station, a donation box for a youth science club. Someone had chalked constellations across the asphalt. Aaliyah skipped from star to star, reading the names out loud as if they were old friends. Nina stood beside Marcus, arms folded tight against a breeze, eyes on her daughter's delighted orbit. "She hasn't had a day like this in a long time," she admitted. "Get used to it," he said, then caught himself, tempering the promise into something humbler. "I mean, I hope there are more." They watched Aaliyah kneel carefully, guiding Jeremiah's little finger along a chalk line connecting dots. Buddy yawned theatrically and flopped on the tail of Cassiopeia. "Can I ask you something?" Nina said after a while. "Anything. What happens when people at your level start asking questions about where you spend your time, your money, your reputation?" "They already are, but I built a company on decisions that made sense to me, not the room. This is the first one that feels like it matters beyond the bottom line." Nina searched his face for the catch and didn't find one. The wind lifted a few strands of her hair. She tucked them behind her ear, a gesture so human and unguarded he had to look away to steady himself. "Okay," she said. "Then I'll try something too." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded flyer. "Evening shift, Market Street,
grocery. They offered me extra hours starting next week. I was going to say no because of childcare, but if I can set up a schedule with your contacts, maybe I can move us faster." "That's not you owing me," Marcus said quickly. "That's you steering your life, and I'm here to back your steering." She smiled, small but real. "Then we're agreed." Dusk rinsed the sky with lavender. Back at the apartment, the kids fell asleep within minutes, sugar-tired from the fair. Buddy snored on his back, paws twitching at dream squirrels. Nina and Marcus stood in the doorway, the air a quiet envelope around them. "You turned 30 days into space to breathe," she said. "That's more than most would bother to do." He shook his head. 30 days is nothing. We'll make more." Nina studied him, the steady way he filled a room without swallowing it. "You keep saying we, like it's easy. It's not easy. It's right." For a beat, neither spoke. Then Aaliyah rolled over in sleep, one hand flopping outward to clutch the edge of her telescope drawing. The paper crinkled, a small sound that somehow filled the hall. Nina glanced down, then back up, eyes bright with something new. "Tomorrow, could you take us to the library? We'll need a card for Aaliyah, and I should look up classes. Maybe bookkeeping, something steady." "Tomorrow," Marcus agreed. "Library, then bakery. Sky City still needs pastries." She laughed, soft and startled, and the sound folded the day closed with a gentle click. On the walk to his car, Marcus felt the city different under his shoes. Same streets, same skyline, but aligned to a truer compass. He didn't have a timetable, only a direction, and the certainty that some bridges are built one plain, patient board at a time. And as the elevator in his building carried him upward, he realized the numbers in his life had finally met their proof, not in profit, but in a drawing on a fridge he didn't own yet.
The sun slipped between the cracks of the blinds in Nina's apartment, painting thin stripes of gold across the worn carpet. Morning had arrived again, and with it the rhythm of ordinary survival. Yet something felt different, lighter somehow. Marcus's presence the day before had shifted the air, though none of them quite knew how long that feeling could last. Nina stood at the counter, stirring a pot of oatmeal. The sound of the spoon clinking against the sides filled the silence. She glanced at her daughter and son, Aaliyah drawing shapes on a scrap of paper, and Jeremiah pounding on a plastic bowl like it was a drum. Buddy wagged his tail, keeping beat with the boy's noise. Her lips curved almost into a smile before she shook her head and sighed. "Don't get used to it, Nina," she warned herself. Happiness, in her experience, was a fleeting visitor. Just then, a knock at the door startled her. She froze, hand hovering mid-air with the spoon. Fear bloomed in her chest. Knock after knock never brought good news. Rent collectors, final notices, neighbors with complaints, always shadows of things she'd tried to bury. When she opened the door, Harold stood there. He adjusted his glasses, carrying his usual folder of forms, his mouth already set in that sharp, skeptical line. "Harold asked me to drop this off, and to see how things are," he said flatly. Nina stiffened. "We're fine."
Harold scanned the apartment behind her, the children, the clutter, the smallness of it all. His eyes softened for a flicker before his walls went up again. "Look, I don't know what Marcus thinks he's doing. He gets too involved too fast." But his voice faltered, surprising even himself. "Yesterday, I saw something. I saw him different. Maybe he needs this as much as you do." Nina blinked at him, unsure what to say. Before she could respond, Aaliyah came bounding to the door, holding her drawing of Sky City. "Look, I built the bridge, just like you said." Harold stared down at the messy construction of crayon and tape. Slowly, his lips twitched into something resembling a smile. "Good job, kid." It was the first kind word Nina had ever heard him say. Later that day, Marcus returned. He was dressed less formally this time, no tie, sleeves rolled to his elbows, but still carrying that air of control that seemed unshakable. He brought groceries with him, bread, fruit, and milk, and set them on the counter without asking. "I said I didn't need charity," Nina muttered. "This isn't charity.
This is partnership. You cook, I wash dishes. Fair trade. Aaliyah giggled at the idea of the tall businessman doing dishes. Even Nina, despite herself, chuckled. After lunch, Marcus suggested a walk. The kids needed air, and Nina, after hesitation, agreed. They strolled down the cracked sidewalks of the neighborhood, past shuttered shops and old murals faded by rain. Marcus carried Jeremiah on his hip, surprisingly at ease, while Nina held Aaliyah's hand. "Did you ever think that life could look different than this?" Marcus asked quietly. Nina snorted. "Different doesn't mean better. I stopped dreaming a long time ago." He glanced at her, reading the pain behind her words. "Then let me dream for you until you can again." The sentence lingered, heavy yet tender, and Nina felt her throat tighten. But shadows never stayed away for long. When they returned, an envelope waited at the door. Bold letters stamped across the front. Final notice. Nina's heart plummeted. She ripped it open, fingers trembling. Even with Marcus's help covering rent, past bills had mounted: electric, medical, debts she had buried but never erased. Her knees weakened. "I can't do this," she whispered. Marcus took the letter from her hand, scanning it with eyes sharp as blades. "You're not alone in this anymore, Nina. We'll face it together." But as he said it, memories clawed up inside her. Men before had promised the same, only to vanish when life got too heavy. Could she really trust this man? Or was he just another shadow destined to fade? That night, while the children slept, Nina sat at the window staring at the city lights. Her chest hurt with the weight of questions. Marcus's words echoed in her head. "Then let me dream for you until you can again." For the first time in years, she let herself wonder what it would feel like if someone actually stayed. And across town, Marcus lay awake too. He thought about Nina, about her children, about how quickly they had carved themselves into his life. For a man who built empires on logic, the pull he felt now was terrifying, and yet he couldn't imagine walking away. Tomorrow would demand answers, but tonight both sat in their separate silences, daring, just barely, to hope.
The night bled slowly into dawn, painting the horizon in shades of pink and gray. Nina hadn't slept much. She sat at the table with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the final notice lying like a curse between her and the future. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same cycle: promises, disappointments, survival, and loss. She had lived it before. She had barely survived it before. But Marcus wasn't like the others. At least, that was what her heart whispered. Her mind, however, screamed caution. Don't trust him. Don't let your children hope, only to have that hope torn apart. The soft padding of little feet broke her spiral. Aaliyah wandered in, clutching her blanket, hair sticking out in sleepy tangles. She climbed onto her mother's lap and leaned against her chest. "Mommy, is everything okay?" Nina kissed her daughter's forehead. "Yes, baby, everything's fine." But her voice cracked, betraying her. Before she could say more, a knock came at the door. Her chest tightened. She half expected another landlord demand, another notice. But when she opened it, Marcus stood there. No suit, no polished shoes. He wore jeans and a plain white shirt, his hair slightly mussed, as if he hadn't slept either. In his hand, he held a brown paper bag that smelled of warm bread and fresh coffee. "Breakfast," he said simply. They ate together at the table. Nina, the children, Marcus. Buddy the puppy sat wagging his tail, waiting for crumbs. For a brief moment, it almost felt like a family. Marcus watched Aaliyah butter her toast with exaggerated concentration, Jeremiah trying to mimic her with messy fingers. His eyes softened. This is what I never had, he thought. Money had always been his fortress, his wall against the world. But these children, this small family, they were teaching him something he couldn't buy. After breakfast, Marcus looked at Nina. "Let me help with the bills. Not just rent, all of it." Her fork froze midair. "No, I can't let you." "Nina," his voice was calm but firm, "I'm not here to take control of your life. I'm here to give you breathing space. You're drowning. Let me throw the rope." Her eyes welled with tears, and she pushed her plate away. "Do you know what it's like to have people walk in, act like saviors, and then leave? I can't let my children hope in something that will disappear." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. Then don't believe my words. Watch my actions. Silence filled the room. For once, Nina didn't argue. Later that day, Marcus insisted on taking them out. The kids need fresh air, he said, and for some reason, Nina agreed. Maybe she wanted to test him. Maybe she wanted to see if he really would stay. They walked to the park. The air smelled of cut grass, children's laughter ringing in the distance. Aaliyah ran to the swings, her braids bouncing, as Marcus gave her a gentle push, sending her higher and higher. Jeremiah toddled after Buddy, both of them chasing leaves. Nina sat on the bench, arms folded, but her eyes followed Marcus. He was different when he was with her children. His usual steel gaze softened, his walls cracked. He wasn't the powerful businessman in that moment. He was simply a man who looked like he belonged. A neighbor, Mrs. Green, passed by and stopped. "Nina, is that your brother?" she asked with a curious smile. Nina almost laughed. "No, he's a friend." Mrs. Green's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Well, he looks like someone who cares. Don't push that away, child. Good men don't come often." Nina swallowed hard, her gaze drifting back to Marcus. Maybe Mrs. Green was right, but could she really trust him? As the sun began to set, painting the park in gold, Marcus walked beside Nina on the way home. The children skipped ahead, Buddy barking happily. "I don't expect an answer now," Marcus said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm not walking away." Her steps faltered. She turned to him, searching his face for any crack, any sign of deception. But all she saw was truth, and for the first time in years, Nina allowed herself to whisper a fragile truth back. "I'm scared." Marcus's jaw tightened, his voice low. "So am I." The admission hung in the air, binding them in shared vulnerability. That night, after the children were asleep, Nina sat again at the window. The city lights flickered, and for once she didn't feel alone. Behind her, Marcus lingered at the door, watching quietly before leaving. He didn't push, he didn't demand, he simply gave her space. And that was when Nina realized maybe this man wasn't here to control her. Maybe, just maybe, he was here to set her free.
The morning light spilled gently through the thin curtains of Nina's small apartment. For the first time in a long time, it felt different, less heavy, less suffocating. The night before, she had lain awake thinking about Marcus's words. "Don't believe my words. Watch my actions."
She had spent years building a wall around herself, a fortress made of fear and disappointment. But Marcus was steady, patient, not forcing his way in, but waiting, brick by brick, until she was ready to let light through the cracks. This morning, however, wasn't about her. It was about Aaliyah. Her little girl turned 7 today. There was no cake on the table, no balloons on the ceiling, no pile of wrapped gifts, just the usual clutter of bills and the sound of Jeremiah crying for his bottle. For Aaliyah, birthdays had never been special, just another reminder of what they couldn't have. Still, when she climbed out of bed and saw her mother, Aaliyah whispered, "Good morning, Mommy." Her voice carried hope, even when she had no reason to. Nina kissed her daughter's forehead and forced a smile. "Happy birthday, baby." Aaliyah nodded, clutching Buddy, the scruffy little puppy who had been her best friend since the day Nina found him trembling behind a dumpster. "It's okay, Mommy. We don't need cake." But her eyes betrayed her, flicking toward the window as if she wished the world would notice her, just once. Marcus did. He had been up since dawn, making calls, arranging details. His assistant had been confused at first. Why would a man who could host galas in marble halls care so much about a child's birthday in a crumbling apartment? But Marcus didn't care about appearances. He cared about Aaliyah. When he arrived, the children were still in their pajamas. Nina looked surprised to see him, but before she could speak, Marcus lifted a bakery box with a grin. "I hope she likes chocolate." Aaliyah's eyes widened. Her small hands covered her mouth. Is that for me?" Marcus knelt down so their eyes met. "Of course it is. Today is your day, Aaliyah." Tears welled instantly in her eyes, and she launched herself into his arms. "Thank you." The cake was only the beginning. Marcus suggested they all go out, just for the day. Nina hesitated, worry etched across her face. "Marcus, we can't afford—" "You don't need to," he interrupted softly. "Let me do this. Let me give them one memory they'll never forget." So they went. For the first time, Aaliyah rode the carousel in the city park. Jeremiah clapped his tiny hands as the painted horses went up and down. Nina found herself laughing, an unguarded, honest laugh she hadn't heard from herself in years, as Marcus tried and failed to win a stuffed bear from the claw machine. They ate cotton candy that stuck to their fingers, ice cream that melted faster than they could lick. Buddy trotted happily beside them, his little tail wagging at every step. It wasn't wealth that made the day magical. It was presence. It was someone looking at Aaliyah and saying, "You matter. You are worth celebrating." As the sun began to sink, casting the city in gold, Marcus led them back to the apartment. But when they reached the building, Aaliyah froze. The stairwell was decorated with balloons. A paper banner, unevenly hung but full of color, read, "Happy birthday, Aaliyah." Neighbors leaned from their doors, smiling. Mrs. Green from next door held a plate of cookies. Someone had brought a small speaker, playing soft music. Nina's hand flew to her mouth. "Marcus, you didn't—" "He made a few calls," he shrugged, though his eyes gleamed with pride. "But it looks like your neighbors did most of the work." Aaliyah squealed, twirling in her pink dress, borrowed but looking brand new in the glow of her joy. "Mommy, Mommy, look! It's a party!" Nina's eyes blurred. For 7 years she had carried the weight of being mother and father, protector and provider, soldier and shield. And here, at last, someone had lifted a piece of that burden. Later that evening, the cake was cut. Aaliyah's friends from the building sang loudly, off-key, but full of love. Marcus lit the single candle, and as Aaliyah closed her eyes to make a wish, he glanced at Nina. She was watching her daughter with tears streaming down her cheeks, her hand pressed to her heart. When the flame was blown out, Aaliyah whispered to Marcus, "I wished for you to stay." The words hit him harder than any boardroom battle, harder than any victory he had ever won. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, after everyone had gone, Nina stood by the window, the faint smell of cake still in the air, the echo of laughter lingering. Marcus stood beside her, silent. Finally she spoke. "You changed her life today." He shook his head gently. "She changed mine." Nina turned, and for the first time she didn't look at him with suspicion or fear. She looked at him with gratitude, and something else, something that might one day grow into love. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the small miracle that had unfolded in one forgotten corner. But inside that apartment, hope had been reborn, lit not by wealth or grand gestures, but by the simple truth that every child deserves to feel seen, cherished, and celebrated. And for Aaliyah, her 7th birthday would be the first she remembered, not of absence, but of abundance. The end.
The next morning dawned gray, the city wrapped in a thin veil of mist. Marcus sat in his office on the 20th floor. A view of skyscrapers spread before him like steel giants. His assistant spoke about contracts and meetings, but his mind wasn't there. It was still in that tiny kitchen, where laughter over chocolate cake had been louder than any applause he had ever received in boardrooms. He leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie. On the desk lay his phone with a new drawing Aaliyah had texted through Nina, a clumsy sketch of Saturn's rings colored in with crayons. The caption read, "For Marcus, thank you for dinner." He smiled, but the smile faded quickly. A knock sounded at his door, and Harold, a longtime business associate, stepped in. Harold was older, grayer, with a sharp suit and sharper eyes. "You've been distracted," Harold said, lowering himself into the chair opposite. "Some of the board members are whispering. They think you're preoccupied." Marcus straightened. "I've been managing everything just fine." "Managing, yes, but distracted. That's new. They're asking where you've been spending your evenings." Harold leaned forward. "You're a millionaire businessman, Marcus. The image matters. Be careful where you invest your time." Marcus clenched his jaw. He knew Harold meant well in his blunt way, but the implications stung. Why should it matter if he spent time with a girl and her struggling family? Meanwhile, in the modest apartment across town, Nina folded laundry at the kitchen table. Aaliyah sat nearby, drawing more planets, while Jeremiah napped in the corner. But the laughter from last night had cooled. The landlady had visited that morning, her voice curt. "Rent is due by Friday. No excuses." Nina pressed her hands against the pile of shirts, fighting tears. She had been grateful for Marcus's kindness, but she hated depending on it. She wanted to stand tall for her children, not appear like a charity case. Aaliyah, oblivious, hummed softly. "Mommy, Marcus said he might bring a telescope. Can he really do that?" Nina looked at her daughter, bright-eyed, hopeful, and felt the weight of responsibility crush harder. Marcus was kind, but how long could kindness last before it turned into pity? That evening, Marcus returned, carrying a thin box under his arm. When Aaliyah saw it, she squealed, "The telescope!" She hugged him so tightly he nearly dropped it. They set it up on the balcony, the mist clearing enough to reveal a silver sliver of the moon. Aaliyah pressed her eye to the lens, gasping as if she had discovered treasure. "Mommy, look! I can see craters!" Nina approached, hesitant, then leaned down to peer through. For the first time in weeks, her tired face softened. Marcus watched her, realizing she hadn't had a moment to simply see wonder in a very long time. But just as warmth filled the small space, a neighbor walked by below, muttering loud enough to be heard, "Rich men buying poor families. Seen it before."